and I know this by heart because this is up in big letters emblazoned on the wall of Blooom right now. He said, Wall Street has made a habit of running in the opposite direction of people with small accounts. Maybe we should build something and run towards them.
What is up, everyone? This is episode number 2 of the Idea to Reality podcast with Chris Costello, and I am your host, Tal Tamir. If this is your first time listening in, I want to say first and foremost, welcome. My intentions with the Idea to Reality podcast are to help people who have a great idea execute on it and bring it into reality to create a thriving business or lifestyle. This will be accomplished through interviews with entrepreneurs, business owners, and thought leaders who have taken a great idea and turned it into reality. We will focus on the micro steps they took to get to where they are today and provide you with actionable steps on how to execute on your dreams. On the show today, we have Chris Costello. Chris is the chairman and co-founder of Blooom, one of the nation's fastest growing robo-advisors aimed at helping millions of underserved retirement savers. Chris has earned the prestigious Certified Financial Planner designation and has been working with individual clients and building portfolio allocations for over 2 decades. Chris has personally coached people through the ups and downs of the market, including the dot-com crash and financial crisis. Prior to Blooom, he co-founded another investment advisory firm that grew to manage over $500 million for clients. At Blooom, Chris leads the company in building innovative financial services to reach all underserved Americans. Blooom has been named one of the world's most innovative companies by Fast Company, and Chris was selected as one of the 10 to watch in 2016 by Wealth Management. Now, without further ado, let's jump right into this very exciting episode. Well, hey Chris, thanks so much for being here today and taking the time to talk with me and my audience. I am super excited to hear all about you and your journey, so let's jump right into it.
Well, cool. Well, thank you for giving me a platform to talk about this.
It is my absolute pleasure, Chris. I think it would be beneficial to start talking about your upbringing, your childhood, where you came from, and then we're going to go all the way into what you're currently working on today.
Sure. Well, I actually think it's really good that you asked me about my childhood because, truthfully, I think it's probably the case in just about everyone's situation where I think how you were raised and the things that went well for you and the things maybe more importantly that didn't go well for you as a child can generally turn out to be quite influential in terms of the kind of person you are as an adult and your work ethic and your values and your beliefs and so I would say as a kid, I was somebody who, well, first of all, we grew up. I'm sitting here in a suburb of Kansas City, in an office right now that's probably all of 15-minute car ride from like my childhood home. So I joke that I'm fairly untraveled. Grew up in a small town called Olathe, Kansas. Ended up going just right down the road about 30 miles to the University of Kansas. Happy to brag about them right now because it's getting ready for March Madness and basketball, which we obviously have a very storied tradition at KU. And then my wife and I and our family have settled. We moved all the way across the city line into the city adjacent to the city that I grew up in. So we've not gone far. And I'll tell you that it must be a really good place here to raise a family because people are not here for the weather. I can tell you that for certain, because we get here in Kansas, we get, it could be 3 degrees in January, and it could be 100 degrees and humid in July and August. So we literally get the worst of the extremes where there might be, a month or so in the winter where you just don't go outside, and it's almost like a month in the summer you don't want to go outside either. So what's the reason that people even, stick around? Why do people actually come back and settle here in the Midwest? I think it's mainly because it's a damn good place to raise a family. I was very fortunate, even though we, did not have much money at all. When I was growing up, I was going to some of the best public schools, literally, I think, in the country. The area around my county, Johnson County, are known for having some of the best schools in all of the country that are that are free, public education that you can walk to from your house. And so I think that's probably a big reason why we chose to stick around. But back to my childhood, I was somebody who was not the best athlete, but I was very involved in sports. And so if I wanted to be good, I had to work hard. And so I do think that I developed a decent work ethic as a kid, because things did not necessarily come easy to me. And I certainly think that carried on into my later life. As I mentioned earlier, we came from very modest financial roots. My parents were not in a position to be able to pay for my college, and so I had to foot that bill myself, which meant graduating with about $35,000 of student loan debt, a little bit of credit card debt to boot. So very familiar with the situation that unfortunately is plaguing tons of Americans today. The problem has certainly got worse, which is how many people that are coming out of school, out of university with quite a bit of student loan debt. So I feel their pain. I understand. I hated being in debt. There was not a day that went by after college that I didn't think about my debt and want to get that crap out of my life as soon as possible. But again, that too, I think, was part of what shaped me and ended up, having a role in terms of the type of person that I grew up to be. And obviously had to take my education seriously because I was footing the bill for it myself, and which is why I also graduated in 4 years, which I look back and talk about regrets. I was like, why was I in such a big hurry to get out of college in 4 years? It's like going to a really good party and leaving at 9 o'clock or something. So, but it's because I was paying for it, I think, was the main reason. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's in a few minutes, that's the nutshell of the childhood, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and I totally agree with you. It's such an epidemic, what's going on with the college debt and the loans. It's really terrible. Mm-hmm. It's just such a massive problem in our country, and we have to do something about it, because the way it is, it's for like your kids, let's say whenever I have kids, the prices are only continuing to get higher and higher.
Yeah.
So
Yep. Yeah. The problem is that having debt, a lot of people don't think about it this way, but having debt, I think the biggest damage that it causes is that it takes away your choice. When you have debt, and whether it be student loan debt or credit card debt or a car loan or a mortgage debt, eventually you start stacking those debts up on top of you, and it takes away choice. And what I mean by choice is that you might be forced into a situation where you have to stay in a job that you don't love, but you need that income because you've got these payments to make. And the other thing that this massive amount of student loan debt, the other effect that it's having is that fewer people are going into positions like teaching or a non-for-profit, charity work. Fewer people are starting businesses today. It's hard to start a business as a 24-year-old college grad if you've got $100,000 in student loan debt that you need to start paying on. So, and ironically, my mom and I were just talking about this a couple days ago. We were reminiscing about the cost of college, and she was telling me, when she went to college, like way back in the 60s, that she seemed to remember that the state school is like $1,000 a year. And there was a time actually where you could work a summer job and maybe a part-time job during the school year, and you could pay for your college education. There ain't no way, unless you're just pulling down an insane amount of money as a college kid, there ain't no way normally kids today with summer work and a part-time job during the school year can come even close to paying the tuition of these schools. And that is specifically why so many people are in debt, and then they've got this debt. They graduate, it changes their, they're not able to, wouldn't it be cool, like, if you didn't have any debt from college and you could maybe just take a year off and, like, travel the world or go volunteer somewhere before you start, into your career? Well, it's hard to do, again, if you've got debt.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It really, like you said, takes away that choice,
Mm-hmm.
to go do something that you would prefer, pursue a passion or travel, like you said, go see the world, but you got to
Yep.
pay those debts. They don't give you time. They're like, okay, you're graduated. You got to start paying that off.
Exactly. You got some grace period, and then you got to start paying the piper. And yeah, and I think a lot of people, a lot of the kids graduating today, they'd like to do some of the things like maybe do some traveling or do some volunteer work before they get in the rat race. And I worry that they're not, that's not happening as much.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree with you more. So just to jump back to your childhood really quick, do you have any siblings?
I do. Yeah, I've got, I'm the oldest of three. So I've got a middle sister, and then a younger brother. My brother and I have actually worked together as financial advisors for about, let's see, probably 15 or 16 years. He was part of the original group. It was myself and my brother Ryan and Kevin. The three of us started our first financial advisory firm back in 2004, an independent firm that we built from scratch. And then Kevin and I, once we had built that firm up to a pretty good size, and then Kevin and I actually in 2013 is when we started Blooom, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, I was the oldest of three, so I blazed the trail for the young. I always joke that my younger two, Annie and Ryan, had a much easier time than I did, since I blazed the trail for them.
Oh yeah, no, I'm the oldest also, so I totally know where you're coming from. Yeah, we make it a little bit easier for our younger siblings, I like to say, from a parent's perspective, and that's funny that you say that.
Oh, it's so true. But the thing we would joke about is, like, if you look at my parents, since I was the firstborn, this is probably the same for you. My parents have this really well organized baby book with all these pictures of me.
Yeah.
And then my sister Annie, I think she's got a baby book, but, like, there's not a whole lot of pictures in it. And then my brother Ryan doesn't even have a baby book. Like, there's no, they're like completely, by the third, like, we don't need to mess with that.
Right. Once it gets, we kind of know what's going to happen. It's not all the same.
Exactly.
Oh, that's too funny. So is Ryan still working with that original company that you created?
He is. Yep. That company's called the Retirement Planning Group. That company focuses mainly on people that are kind of starting to see the finish line in terms of retirement. That company's trying to branch out a little bit more and help a slightly younger crowd. But for the most part, that company was built around being very good in our hometown at helping people make the transition from work life into retirement. So all of the financial questions and topics and things to consider and plan for, effectively to be able to make that leap from earning a paycheck to never earning a paycheck again and living off of your resources and income. That's something that firm got very good at. And he is still there, still doing great, helping a lot of clients, again, make sure that they're in a good position to transition into retirement. And that actually, that when Kevin and I and Ryan were building that company, that really was one of the big reasons that eventually led us to start Blooom. And I don't want to get ahead of us in the conversation, but that company specifically was generally helping people that had at least $500,000 in their investment portfolio. And for me personally, back when I was still working in that role, it was generally if you had you had to have at least $1 million to get a meeting with me. And the thing that really kind of nagged at me and just didn't sync up totally in my mind was that my own mom and dad didn't have technically anything close to that amount of assets to qualify, and I use that word intentionally, qualify to be a client of our firm. Now, clearly, they were clients of mine. They're my parents. But had my brother and I not been in the business, nobody would have helped my mom and dad. No financial advisor would have been willing to sit down with my mom and dad with, as little of investment assets as they had. And that really became the big reason. I'm sure we'll get to that later, but that was a big reason behind us eventually starting Blooom 5 years ago.
Oh yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you, and we are definitely going to hit on that in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But just a quick question on that. Was it kind of just like a nagging feeling or something that just really didn't sit well with you while you were working at these other firms before you guys started Blooom, or what made you make that initial leap,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say that it was like something that made me mad, because these clients that I was helping, they were great people. I mean, these were salt of the earth. Even if they were worth $2 or $3 or $4 or $10 million, they were just completely salt of the earth people, just quality folks. That they weren't. Almost none of them were high income earners. We didn't work with small business clients because I kind of always thought they were pains in the butt. Because I knew I was a small business owner and I was kind of a pain in the butt, and so it wasn't. Our clients weren't business owners. They weren't high income earners. They didn't win the lottery. They didn't inherit a bunch of money. They were all people that, regardless of their income, just found a way to live on less than they made. That was a common theme across these millionaires that were in our office. Is they're good folks that just found out a way to live within their means. We almost never saw BMWs or Mercedes in our parking lot. I saw a lot of plastic watches on people's wrists and not Rolexes, and it's like, this is why they retired with $4 million, because they just were very smart and socked away, always made it a priority to save money for a rainy day, and they got themselves in that position. So, but I also felt that these people that we were helping, clearly we were helping them, but to a large extent they were going to be okay. They were arriving on retirement's doorstep with significant assets and almost always no debt. And a lot of things would have had to have gone bad, catastrophically bad in the world for them not to be okay financially. And meanwhile, you've got the rest of the American population that doesn't have a seven-figure account that desperately needs some of this advice and count. I feel like I'm a good advisor. I feel like I've got really good advice in my head to give to people that can change their financial lives. And I was spending my days really giving it to people that were already okay. And so it wasn't really something that totally nagged at me. It's just kind of a thought that, there's just kind of the financial services business model is kind of flawed, in that the people that arguably need the help the most generally are forced to do it themselves. They're given a brochure and a pat on the back, and they're said, go figure this out. It's important stuff. Make sure you understand this. But conversely, if you've got lots of money, then you've got tons of people lining up that want to help you. And the other thing that happened, and this is, I don't mind sharing this, is personal, but I don't mind sharing this, is that in 2012, my dad, at the age of 63, died of cancer, and I saw my dad work all the way up until I think it was August of 2012, and then just the chemotherapy was just destroying him, and he could no longer work. And then I think the following month he went into the hospital, and within a few weeks he was gone. And so my dad, at age 63, never had one single day of retirement. And I just remember thinking, damn, if something now something like Blooom existed back in the early 1970s, maybe, just maybe, my mom and dad, maybe they could have made a couple tweaks and different decisions and got the right piece of advice at the right time in their early 20s and when I was a baby or something. And maybe my dad could have retired at 60, and he could have had a couple years with my mom to be able to travel, spend more time with my girls, my kids or grandkids. Because my dad loved to travel and do like road trips and see like the weird shit in Kansas, like the deepest hand dug well in Kansas, like he would like drive to go see that, or the biggest ball of twine or something like that. I mean, he loved that kind of stuff, and I know he would have loved to have done more of that. And so that, those are the ingredients. You talk about how a childhood and a life, kind of come together to create a recipe for why things happen. I mean, well, that's there you go. I was raised, by people that were awesome parents. And I think it's a sign that my mom and dad did such a great job, is my brother and sister and I never knew we were poor. I know we were now looking back, but we didn't know it at the time. And, so kind of being raised that way, having the debt, then helping people and seeing how they got to that point in their lives, how they live their lives, and then feeling like there needs to be something out there that can help people that don't have gigantic accounts, because that is where you can really make an impact on someone's life. The analogy that I use to explain like how big the impact can be on somebody younger that's just getting started. And when I say younger, I'm talking about somebody in their 20s, 30s, and even 40s. Is if you think about like when SpaceX is launching their next satellite up into orbit, okay? If you think about if they get that initial trajectory like just off by a little bit, by the time it gets way up into space, it could be off tens of thousands of miles, from where their intended target is. Well, that same analogy works when you're talking about a young person, somebody in their 20s and 30s and 40s. Sometimes just a little tiny adjustment or a piece of advice delivered at the right time. Do this, don't do that. Make sure you do this. Don't forget about that. With respect to your finances, can have that same gigantic trajectory impact down the road, where it may seem like a tiny little adjustment at age 33 today, but by the time you hit 60, you've had 27 years, and now that impact has become huge. And maybe you could retire at 60, like I was talking about earlier with my dad. So we think that, I mean, not to overly dramatize this, but what the work we're doing at Blooom today, I know that all of us at that company feel like we've got a very good shot at helping some number of people stop working sooner. And what is that worth? What would that have been worth to my dad? What is that worth to somebody who might be able to stop working at 55 and go volunteer for the next 15 years, or start a small business, start another chapter in their life. I mean, that's why this stuff is so important.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your dad, and it really sounds like that's a big, really hit home for you, how it's, if maybe, if something could have happened earlier, let's say he had something like this in the 70s, then he could have retired at 55 or 60 and spent some time with your family and his wife. But, it's what you said with that analogy with the trajectory, it's I couldn't agree more. It's really just 30, 40, 50 years of compound interest, you start off on the right track and you keep doing the right things over and over, and you stay on track, once you hit that.
Or it's even like this, like, I when I get the chance, I tell people all the time, and there's going to be a new group of people, your audience, that's going to hear this, and there's going to be somebody in your audience, somebody is going to listen to this, and they're going to do what I'm about to say, and that is, when you go buy your house, do it on a 15-year mortgage instead of a 30-year. Nobody wants to do a 15-year mortgage because your payment's higher, which means you generally can afford less house. And most people are like, well, shit, I want the biggest house possible. Can I finance this over 50 years? But there are some people that will hear the advice that the right thing to do is a 15-year mortgage, and that one thing alone could change their financial life. That one decision alone could change their financial trajectory. because they could potentially put themselves in a spot. If you're going out at 30 or something, or 35, and you're buying a house and you do it on a 15-year mortgage, and you have a paid for house when you're 45 or 50, you know how few Americans are in that position right now? Like probably less than one. I have no stats on this, so don't quote me on this. But my guess is it's like, I can't imagine it's much more than 1%. And like that one thing alone, that one little decision alone could put you in a position where maybe money's not an issue for you at that point.
Yeah, that's so wait, why do you say that? How money might not be an issue if that's the point, if once you hit 45 or 50? What do you mean by that?
Well, if you are 45 or 50 and you have got a paid for house and no other debts, you're in a lot of reasons, or in a lot of ways, you're bulletproof, man. There is a lot of shit that could go wrong and you're still going to be okay. When you have no debts to anybody, I mean, that gets back to what we were talking about earlier, having freedom and choice. You know, you don't even need as big of a portfolio in retirement if you've got no debt. You know, if all you need is money to pay for food and utility and taxes and travel, that changes the amount you need to have saved up. Versus, you know, if you're still paying on cars or you're leasing cars and you still got a couple $1,000s a month in a mortgage payment and maybe some credit card debt. I mean, that's when retirement gets hard because you need a lot more income to be able to service that debt.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's jump back into our series of events here. So You went to University of Kansas, you said, correct?
That's right. Yep.
Awesome. So we're there 4 years, unfortunately.
4 short years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I took a couple extra years. Thankfully, I got lucky in that aspect. But even the 5.5 or whatever it was still blew by me so quickly, you know.
It goes so fast, yeah.
Yeah, so I tell people, you know, when they're young and about to go to college, I say enjoy it, you know. Just enjoy every second of it, you know, because before you know it, you'll be done and you'll be grinding away in the rat race. Hopefully not quite in the rat race, but doing something you enjoy, but really having to put in a lot of time and effort. And you don't really have that that flexibility, you know, to kind of do whatever you want with whoever you want and just enjoy, which is a shame, you know, because you think that's how life should be. You know, you should.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's, you know, I still think it's possible to have some more of that even after college, again, if you're not in a position where you're like decisions are being made for you. You know what I mean? If you're still kind of the master of your own ship, you know, after you get out of college, because you've been able to come out debt free if possible, then you can still kind of enjoy some of that freedom. But you're right. You know, I think sometimes people think that they're stressed and busy in college, but it's looking back on that, it was definitely full of fond memories, and it definitely wasn't as hard as I thought it was at the time.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Of course, my GPA may reflect some of that too. Yeah, so we'll just say I was not a 4.0 person. We'll just leave it at that.
You and me both, Chris. Believe me. Okay, so speaking of getting out of college, what did you do when you got out of college? What was your first real job like? Tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I in college, my favorite class in college was finance, and my least favorite I think was accounting. So I was in the business school, so I knew I didn't want to be an accountant. Which, by the way, another advice I give oftentimes when I get a chance to go back to KU and speak to some of the students there from time to time, and I always tell them that do your best to find internships. Between, you know, while you're in college. And I said, actually, the biggest thing about an internship, the biggest service you could do for yourself is maybe to find out what you don't want to do. A lot of people think they need to do an internship to find out what they want to do. Actually, a great service could be finding out what you don't like, you know, and you may think you want to be an accountant when you're a freshman or sophomore in college, but go spend a summer and be an intern, you know, at an accounting firm and find out if that's really what you thought it was going to be. Because if you can figure out before you've got 4 years and 5 years vested in college and all that money invested in, if you can figure out before then that that's not something you want to do, because the worst thing that can happen is you spend all this money, 4 or 5 years, you graduate, you go out to become an accountant. You're like, geez, this sucks. I had no idea. This is what I wish I would have known this before. And so. For folks that may be still in college listening to this, please do what you can to find an internship. And again, if that internship ends up being something you're like, crap, I don't like this at all, consider that a win, because you found that out now when the stakes are low. But so I enjoyed finance, and then I took a class on basically the stock market, investing in the stock market, and was really fascinated by that, and so decided that I wanted to try and get a job in the investment world. And I was a kid, at a state school. So I figured out that I had an interest in the stock market, and so I applied to a bunch of the banks, the investment banks on Wall Street. And again, here I am, a kid from Kansas at a public school that, as I joked about earlier, did not have a 4.0. And I think the best thing I got back from all of those banks was just like a postcard saying that, thank you, we've got your resume on file. So I knew quickly I did not have the credentials to get me into Wall Street from Kansas. So ended up taking a job at a small brokerage firm in Kansas City as a stockbroker. And they don't even use that term anymore. This was back in 1995 when I graduated and took a job. I can still remember the day I started. It was June 5th, 1995. And the Dow Jones that day. Do you follow the stock market a little bit yourself? I'm going to give you a little test here.
Oh, if you're going to test me, I'm going to say not so much.
So the Dow Jones Industrial Average today is around 25,000. Okay, mm-hmm. When I started in the business on June 5th, 1995, it closed that day at 4,444. That's why I can remember it. 4,444. Wow. So. In my what feels like short time period, I guess it's been almost 23 years. The stock market has gone up by a factor of about 5, a little bit more than 5, almost 6 actually. So obviously, very impressive run. But so started as a stockbroker, which meant I spent my days literally on the phone, calling prospective clients or existing clients and selling stock to them. Most of the time you do that standing up. I still have this problem to this day of wolfing down my food, because back then what you do is you would put the phone down, you'd hustle back to the kitchen, you'd put your frozen entree into the microwave, hit it for 3 minutes. You'd go back to your desk during the 3 minutes, get back on the phone, make another phone call. And then when that was over, you go get the food out of the microwave. You'd eat it standing up, so literally you'd take 45 seconds to eat this frozen entree that was now piping hot, and then straight back to the phone to make more phone calls. So I've got this really bad habit still. I can't not eat fast, and I think it happened because of those lunch breaks. Those 45-second lunch breaks way back in 1995. But that was not. It was an exciting time. It certainly gave me very thick skin, because we used to have to make about 300 cold calls per day, mm-hmm. And they would track you on doing that. In fact, I've got a great story I'll share with you. This was back when I was 23, and so I had a friend that was getting married, and so Friday night was the bachelor party. But back then, we worked on Saturdays from 7:30 until 12:30, and so I went to the bachelor party on Friday night. As you could probably imagine, Saturday morning I was moving fairly slowly, and we come into work at 7:30, and I can't remember what we did for the first hour and a half back then, but at 9 o'clock we would generally Saturday morning get on the phone and start cold calling for the next 3 hours. Well, I'm literally dragging ass in every possible facet, and my boss at the time didn't think I was dialing the phone fast enough, and so he came up to me and he grabbed a big roll of Scotch tape, and he literally taped the phone to my hand. Oh my and he said, "You're not going to put this phone down for the next 3 hours." And so, I'm 23. When you're that age, I think you just tolerate that nonsense. But yeah, so there is, as crazy as that was, I mean, it did. I developed a thicker skin. I was, confident, calling people that I didn't know and talking to them. Definitely honed my sales skills back then. But I was anxious to get, in with a big, kind of well-known, reputable investment firm. And so in 1997, I left and joined, at the time, Paine Webber. Paine Webber was later bought by UBS, which still exists today. But 1997, Paine Webber was still independent, and big Wall Street-based brokerage firm. Started with them out in the office right out here in my hometown, and really at that point started to kind of build my niche as more of a financial advisor, and started to get really good and focus on people, like I talked about earlier, that were readying themselves to make the transition from work life into retirement. About that time in 1999, my longtime business partner, myself, Kevin, and Randy, all three were fraternity brothers at the University of Kansas, and Kevin and I ended up connecting in 1999 at Paine Webber, and we became business partners back then. We've been business partners ever since. And he and I, when we started working together, I think very quickly both of us had a very strong entrepreneurial itch that we were looking to scratch, and we didn't necessarily see all the value or recognize the value of working for the big firms. We felt like we could do it better, more transparently, more fair for our clients. The big firms charged a lot of fees, and I just never felt like they had the best interests of our clients first. And so Kevin and I, it wasn't too long after we were kind of teamed up within the brokerage firm that we started to kind of think and plot and plan for when it would make sense for us to strike out on our own, hang our own shingle, and start our own company. And eventually we did that in the early part of 2004. So we left, the friendly confines, if you will, of the big firm, and literally went out and started our own independent company from scratch. At the time, it was myself and Kevin and my brother Ryan, and we started that firm with 0 clients. And today, that firm manages about $750 million. For probably close to 1,000 clients, I think. And again, most of those people, within spitting distance or already in retirement. That firm got, very, very well known in the greater Kansas City area for being good at retirement planning. Most of the growth has come from word of mouth and, clients telling their friends that these are people that you can trust and they know what they're talking about. And that was 2004 that we started that, and to bring it up a little bit closer to present. So I talked about earlier in 2012 when my dad passed away. Well, it was January of 2013, and it was an email late one night from Kevin to me. As entrepreneurs often do, we had put the kids to bed, and 10 o'clock we're back, online working in some fashion. Because I think that's the thing about that I love about being an entrepreneur. It's like I wanted at 10 o'clock at night to come, get back on the computer and do more work. It was not like, shit, I got to do this. It's like, I can't wait to do this, When it's your own thing, it's something that's very easy to be passionate about and want to put a lot of time into it. And, but Kevin sent the fateful email, or actually the fateful quote, in January of 2013. And in that email, he said, and I know this by heart because this is up in big letters emblazoned on the wall of Blooom right now. He said, Wall Street has made a habit of running in the opposite direction of people with small accounts. Maybe we should build something and run towards them. And I've said that quote hundreds of times, and the hair on the back of my neck still stands up every time I say it, because that literally came at the right time in my life and in his life, and I think we were ready for the next challenge. The retirement planning group, the first company we started, was doing great. It didn't necessarily need Kevin and I, on a day-to-day basis, and we saw a huge opportunity, a huge problem that we thought we could solve. And so I think that same night we CC'd on an email Randy, who ended up being the third co-founder of Blooom. And within a few weeks, we had earmarked a couple nights a week where we would, after we put the kids to bed, we'd meet in Randy's basement and work into the wee hours of the morning, starting to kind of think about and plan, how we were going to attack this problem. And at that time, we looked at what was happening, with some of the what they call robo-advisors in the space. So some companies had started to crop up that were using technology to scale and to deliver portfolio management to a lot of people, as opposed to one client at a time, meeting with a human. That's part of the problem, as I talked about earlier. You've got humans meeting with other humans. There's only so many people you can meet with in a day, but technology, can handle the work of thousands. And so we saw companies at that time like Betterment and Wealthfront, and they had created these technologies where for a very low cost you could get your portfolio managed. And but what we noticed, interestingly enough, was that no one was building technology for the massive unserved market of retirement plan participants. So people that are at a company that are participating in an employer-sponsored retirement account like a 401k or a 403b, nobody was touching that space. And it's massive. It's huge. Like today, there's almost 90 million people in the United States right now that have one of those accounts through their employer. Wow. And we suspected / knew that, the clients, the wealthy clients that I was working with before Blooom, if they were still working, you're damn right when they came in to do their annual review, I was helping them with their 401k. And they were getting my professional advice for their 401k. But most everybody else, if you didn't have a big account to qualify to get in my door, to get in the door of a financial advisor, everybody else was just kind of left to fend for themselves, how to pick what funds to pick in their 401k. And we're talking about someone's nest egg, like the retirement savings. This isn't fun money. Like this money needs to work well. This is going to be money that most Americans are going to need at some point down the road, because almost nobody listening to your podcast is going to get a pension. My grandpa did when he retired in 1976 from the airlines, but almost no one today is going to get a traditional pension. Fortunately, our teachers are still going to get a pension. My good friend who's a police officer, he's going to get a pension. Firefighters will get a pension. But for the rest of us, corporate America and the gig economy, no pension. It's all on our shoulders to save money, and oftentimes it happens in these 401ks. And wealthy people are getting their shit taken care of. And so we wanted to build something to address the fact that so many of those 90 million people were mismanaging severely these accounts. And how do we know that? Well, I'll tell you how I knew. For the first 20 years of my career, whether I was out in my driveway in the cul-de-sac or I was standing at the sidelines of one of my kids' soccer games, I got asked and Kevin did too, we got asked all the time, just out living our lives. This is how the conversation would go. They say, "Hey, Chris, you're a financial advisor, right?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I am." And they'd say, "Well, I've got this thing. I think it's called, you may have heard of it before. It's called like a 401k1. And I'd say, "You mean a 401k? Yeah, that's it." There's money that is taken out of my paycheck and it goes into this account. And I'm not sure if my employer is handling that for me or if I'm supposed to pick which investments, or, I don't know if I've done it right. Would you take can you help me with this?" And I'd say, "Yeah, of course I will. Send me a copy of your statement and I'd be happy to take a look at it." And so they'd, email me a PDF copy of their 401k statement. And I'm telling you, man, it seemed like 80 or 90% of the time I'd look at their statement and it was a complete hodgepodge of crap. Like it was like, I mean, like there's no rhyme or reason to it. It was like somebody kind of just vomited random choices on the paper. There was no strategy at all behind this. And I'm telling you, I feel like I ran around with a pretty successful group of people. Like these friends of mine, like they were doing really well in their careers, college graduates, but they had no clue how much to have in large cap or bonds or international stocks or company stocks, like all these things that just wasn't intuitive. And we saw time and time again, real people screwing this up on a big scale. And so that, the fact that we knew average Americans didn't have a ton of money, needed this help. We saw how oftentimes people who were trying to do it themselves were screwing this stuff up. We knew there was a big, big opportunity to build something and target that big sector and hopefully try and change their financial trajectory. So that's basically how Blooom started.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. Well, just to recap, I think it was interesting. I want to hit on this, how you went from your small brokerage in Kansas, and you were kind of dreaming of getting with the big boys, about working with a big brokerage, a name brand, and then you actually end up getting there at Payne & Weber. And then after how many years were you there for?
I see. So I started a small firm in 95, moved to Payne & Weber in 97, and then we struck out on our own in 2004.
Yeah, so just like that, you're like, you know what, this big brokerage is not for us. You saw, how they weren't really for their clients, and that was what you guys were trying to do. And I think it was great how you guys went through that whole process and figured out your niche. You guys figured out who you wanted to serve, which is the majority of the American people. Not these people with these massive bank accounts, but people, average, people just that are uneducated with their finances.
Yeah, and not uneducated, just not when it comes to their finances. Because one of the things we say at Blooom all the time is that screwing up your 401k does not discriminate.
Right. I should have not said it like that, but I think it's interesting how in college, because I'm also a college graduate, you don't learn about your 401k. I took a couple finance classes, but wasn't like a finance major. I was an economics major. And being an economics major, I didn't learn anything about managing your 401k or, retirement, filing taxes, which are all very important things once you get into the real world.
Correct.
So I just think it still blows my mind today that some of the most important things that need to be taught at a high school and college level are still not, addressed.
Yeah. And there, there's, of those 90 million people, I use that universe because that's Bloom's addressable market today. Of the 90 million, there is some handful of a million of those people, again, that have some amount of wealth where they're able to get in the door. They've got a financial advisor that's willing to spend some time with them and presumably is giving them some help, whatever that means or looks like with their 401k. And then you've also got another group of some millions of people that actually are comfortable doing it themselves. They enjoy it. Maybe they're those finance geeks that would rather be researching mutual funds at night than watching a basketball game or something. I mean, there's you've got people out there obviously that are comfortable enough day trading. So there's some group of people out there also that is confident, confident, and B, somewhat enjoys doing their own stuff. But again, we're talking about the vast minority of people. I love it when I get a chance to speak in front of a big group because oftentimes what I'll do is I'll start off the presentation and I'll have everybody in the room raise their hand if they're currently participating in a 401k. And I'll say, okay, leave your hands up for a sec. Now, leave your hand up in the air if you are confident that you've got the right choices picked out in your 401k and your investment allocation matches your time horizon to retirement, and you've got a good handle on what the hidden fees are. Keep your hands up in the air if that's the case. And like if there's 1,000 people in the room and originally there was 800 people that put their hand up of having a 401k, then all but, generally, 50 people or so out of that number are going to put their hands down. They're not confident that and that's who we built Blooom for. And that's, we know it's a big number. We know, but the challenge that we've got, and this is both good and bad for Blooom, is the challenge is we're blazing, remember we joked about earlier in the chat when we talked about blazing new territory being the oldest, yeah. For your siblings. Well, we're doing that right now in this space because, up until Blooom, there wasn't, it wasn't even recognized from people in general that like, oh, you mean I can go online and Blooom for $10 a month will actually do all this for me? You mean like for less than I'm paying for Netflix right now, I can get a professional advisor to lean on to do this? People don't even think that that's a possibility. So it's good. It tells us we've created a brand new product segment, but it's a challenge in that we've got to educate people that even a service like this is available today.
Yeah. No, I once I found you and was researching you and looking up on your website. Once I saw that, $10 a month, I was like, these guys really are trying to make a difference. And I can see that you guys are on a massive scale, and it's just so important. That's why I really wanted to have you on here to get my audience, aware of your service, because like you said, I'm sure 80-90% of the listeners are going to have a 401k, and they're probably getting slapped with all kinds of hidden fees.
Yep.
And most of them, I'm sure, do not have a financial advisor. So, that's where, you guys are making a massive impact. I think it's beyond important, so important.
Well, thank you.
No, of course. Thank you. Seriously. Real quick, I want to say how it was funny how you guys started your business in Randy's basement, right? Yep. In your off time. I think it's almost cliche. A lot of times you hear how an entrepreneur starts his business in a garage or a basement, in whatever hours that they get free. And that's exactly what you guys did. But, you put in the work. I would like to hear a little bit more about some of those long nights and kind of what went down there. How did you guys plan for it? What resources did you use? Did you reach out to certain individuals, or was it just kind of the three of you putting your heads together?
Yeah, and initially it was really just the three of us. We bootstrapped the company for about 2.5 years. So we had me, Randy, and Kevin had put quite a bit of our own money into Blooom, and unfortunately, Randy is by far the most technical of the three of us. But Randy didn't write code; he's not a software engineer, and so early on, when we were standing up like the beta version of Blooom, like we were having to outsource development to another development team that was not in our office, and fortunately, we found a really, really good. Although expensive, but really good development shop here in the States, and had a lot of success with them. Unfortunately, they got bought out. We weren't totally surprised when they did, and so we had to transition then the code to another U.S.-based development shop. They did a pretty good job with it. And then for a while, we were trying to use some overseas developers. Again, this is when we were bootstrapping and just trying to make do as much with this with what the resources we had. And we joke that time period when we were outsourcing development overseas was when Randy's hair turned gray. He's got a lot more gray in his hair today than he did when he started. But I never hesitate to give the vast majority of the credit for the product design, simplicity, and just elegance. It was almost all Randy and Kevin. Those two were the ones. I mean, if you look at the Blooom product today, it still looks, in my opinion, a lot like what it did when we first. I mean, it's gotten obviously it's improved, but like you look at some of the way in which the app flows, and even some of the images and language even still exists from what Randy and Kevin originally put into it. So I give those two guys a ton of credit. But it was It was a hard period of time because we were trying to work other jobs and stand up this other company. I don't know that the three of us could have envisioned what Blooom is now at this point. I think one of the reasons why people ever start companies is they also don't think about how hard it will be at times. Because I think if you really had a good understanding of how hard it is, nobody would ever start it, truthfully, but like you don't know how hard it's going to be. And so you do it. And then the other thing that happens when you hear about these stories of serial entrepreneurs, the human mind has a way of forgetting. I don't know if your mind works this way, my mind does. If you have bad experiences in your life, my mind has a tendency, is a good habit of like not remembering them as well. And so I think the people that you hear about that have started multiple companies, I think their minds work that way too, and that they forget the bad and how hard it was. But I mean, it was, if you think about if I think about when we started the retirement planning group, the brick and mortar wealth management financial advisory firm that me, Ryan, and Kevin started in 2004, we were copying a business model that had been done tens of thousands of times before us. Independent financial advisory firm providing financial planning and investment management. I mean, there's tens of thousands of people that have done that business model before us. Nobody had done Blooom before. Nobody had ever done that. And that is what made it so hard. I remember a funny story. Kevin and I were up speaking. This is early in Bloom's journey. This is probably 2 years into Blooom. So this is back in 2015. Kevin and I were up at KU speaking to a class, and Kevin gets up on the chalkboard and he writes the number 8 up on the chalkboard, and he asked these seniors in the business school what they think the significance of number 8 is. And a number of them are guessing average rate of return of the stock market or something like that. And, nobody's getting it even right. And finally, Kevin's like, the number 8 represents the number of times I have wanted to quit Blooom since we started.
Wow.
2 years. And that is, I think it's important that if there's listeners that have designs on, starting something, I think it's good that they hear that, because that's normal. You're going to want to quit at some point, because if you're doing something important, it's probably going to be really, really hard at times. And one of the things I say a lot is that it's much easier to stay with something if there is genuinely deep meaning behind what you're trying to do. I'll give you an example. If all you're doing is trying to start something to make a quick buck, that's not important enough. That doesn't have enough in your gut, in your heart importance that allows you, in my opinion, to stick with it when the shit hits the fan. But if you believe that what you're doing can have a massive impact in a positive way on people, and it gets really, really ugly and nasty, it's a lot easier to stay with it. Because if you were just building it for money, trying to make a big, turn a big buck and flip a company, it's too easy to give it up at that point. Like with Blooom, we felt like the stakes were higher. We felt like we owed it to people like my mom and dad to try and give this all we could, to try and build something to potentially change their lives. And the last thing I'll say to kind of illustrate that point, something that I make fun of all the time is what I call snap crap. Obviously, I'm talking about Snapchat. I call it in my house. I call it snap crap. And I'm poking fun at that company. Clearly, they're a publicly traded company and they're worth billions of dollars. So they've done obviously a few things right. But I have this strong feeling that other than maybe the founders or the people that got wealthy that worked at snap crap, I don't think that there's anybody on planet Earth that's going to get to the end of their life and they're laying on their deathbed and they're reflecting back on their life. I don't think anybody's going to look back ever and say, you know what? One of the things that really enhanced my quality of life was Snapchat. I'm really glad that app was on my phone for all those years. But You ask the 30 people at Blooom that work at Blooom right now, and every single one of them will tell you, I think we have a chance to be in that category. I think we have a shot of building something where there might be somebody way down the road, we'll be long gone, that might look back on their life and think, you know what, that did change my life. That did have a positive effect on my future financial security. And when you have something that important, you know you're onto something, and it makes it really hard to quit. And the other thing that tells you you're onto something is if today Blooom went away, like just poof, magic smoke, Bloom's gone. There's almost 20,000 people right now that are our clients that I know would be worse off. That's the sign you're onto something. That if it goes away, are the clients you had worse off? Okay? And think about all the things that you use on a daily basis that if it went away, it'd probably be really easy to replace, you know? Mm-hmm. But right now, Bloom's the only game in town for what we're doing. And we've got these clients that are depending on us to make this thing work. Because right now, if Blooom goes away, they're back to no good option. They're back to the DIY brochure and having to figure it out themselves. So I'll end it on that.
Wow. No, that's what I was saying before. You guys are here to, make a massive impact for people. And that why, the why of why you mm-hmm. guys do it and why you put in those long nights and you continue to work hard, I'm sure every single day, is because you want, without you guys, these people are just going to be worse off.
Mm-hmm. We believe that.
There's no way around it. I believe it. You guys clearly believe it. And, I'm sure there are thousands, like you said, your clients are very, very grateful for you guys and for all the work that you're doing because it's, it's changing lives.
Well, thank you.
No, of course. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. So just a couple questions to wrap it up. I don't want to take up too much of your time tonight. So a quick question that I like to ask is, what went wrong or not as planned during the initial kind of stages of Blooom, and how did you guys pivot and learn from those mistakes, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I guess the one big pivot in the history of Blooom, and I guess I think pivots maybe, I don't know if that's the right word, but the big, I think, mistake we made that we learned from was for the first several years, once we had the product in the market, we were trying to distribute or market Blooom basically through two totally distinct channels. One, direct to consumer, and the second was through what a lot of people call B2B. So we would go and we would, while we were marketing directly to consumers, we also had an effort underway to market Blooom to people at companies that are in charge of the company 401k, heads of benefits, heads of human resources. We were talking to financial advisors that specialize in the 401k space. We were talking to benefits platforms, benefits aggregators, so to speak. And basically what we were doing is spreading ourselves way too thin, stretching a small company with limited resources way too thin, instead of having just radical focus and going all in on one segment. And so after about 2 years of putting a lot of time and effort and resources in trying to sell Blooom through the B2B channel, April of last year, so almost a year ago, we decided to completely cut bait on that channel and focus all of our resources on marketing directly to the consumer, because truthfully, that had been where the vast majority of our growth up to that point had come from. People one at a time signing up. We'd see somebody from, somebody that worked at Nike, for example, sign up, and then a couple weeks later there'd be another dozen or so people from Nike, because we can see that there's some word of mouth spreading within that company. And we had some good success with some affiliates, and we had good success with PR has always been really good to us, and Facebook to some extent, driving traffic back to maybe another source. And so that was really, really hard because at that time we had a team of about 10 people that was hired and was dedicated to selling Blooom through the B2B channel. And the decision was really, really hard because it affected 10 people. And on one day, we had to say goodbye to 10 people at our company. And I've never had to do that before. And these were people like, it's one thing I've had to fire somebody before that wasn't doing a good job. It's another thing when you're having to let 10 people go that really no fault of their own. It was a decision that the business made that we weren't going to sell through that channel anymore. And so it was, a decision that was contemplated and analyzed, and a lot of, thought went into it. And obviously it sucked at that time. But I can tell you now, 11 months or so later, that was a very good decision for the company because that totally aligned everything at the company in a way in which we only had to build Blooom to delight one person or one entity, if you will, the individual, underserved, confused 401k participant. That's all we had to build Blooom for. We didn't have to build it for financial advisors. We didn't have to build it for heads of human resources. We had to build it just for our client. And it was amazing how with fewer people, how much more efficient our company became, and how imagine the visual of trees parting and all of a sudden you can see clearly to the end, it's like, wow, there it is, so that was a challenge at the time. One of the hardest things of the 5-year journey, but turned out to be a very good decision for the company.
Right. How did you guys make that realization? Was just self-awareness, or were numbers just not adding up, or how did you kind of make that realization that that's the direction you needed to go, was more the direct to consumer and just cut out the B2B completely?
I'll give you a great example. This wasn't the only reason, but this is this is part of it. So today when somebody comes to Blooom, like your listeners today, anybody who's got a 401k or a 403b, you absolutely should go to our website and literally, if it takes you more than 4 minutes, let me know, but it'll take you 3 or 4 minutes. You can get a totally 100% free analysis of the health of your 401k account. So if you care about your retirement account, if you think this is going to be important down the road, take 3 or 4 minutes, go to the Blooom site, just get the free analysis. And then after you get the analysis, you can decide on your own if you even want to sign up and pay $10 a month to have us help you with this. But everybody should get the analysis. So when you get that analysis, one of the things that you will see is how much you're paying in hidden fees. And there's a good chance for a lot of people that's the first time ever that they've seen holy crap, this is my money and I'm paying all those fees inside of that. I didn't even know about that. Mm-hmm. And so that's how we built Blooom. Well, when we would go to heads of benefits, heads of HR, and we'd explain to them how this worked, and we'd talk to them about how all of your employees can get a free analysis on their 401k, and it shows them if they've got the right stock to bond mix, it shows them if they've got enough diversification, and it shows them what the hidden fees are. We had several heads of human resources. You might be able to tell where I'm going with this. We had several heads of human resources that said, we don't want you to show our employees what the hidden fees are because we're afraid that that's going to reflect poorly on us. And so for a while, this is a mistake, you live and you learn. For a while, we actually went to our incredibly valuable engineering team at Blooom and said, can you build a second app flow that does not show the hidden fees? And we'd take that to future, businesses and heads of benefits and say, this is what we do. We'll show your employees if they've got the right stock to bond mix and if they've got the right diversification. And we'd never bring up hidden fees. And at some point, I'm like, no. Our client is the individual. The right thing to do is to expose what they're paying in hidden fees. And it's like, so now we don't have to answer to that bull crap anymore.
Yeah.
We have to answer to our clients. And if you think about the whole financial services ecosystem, if you think about mutual fund money managers, financial institutions, the record keepers of the 401ks, the people at companies that are making decisions for their employees, the CFO or the head of HR or the head of benefits. If you think about all those people, they've all got different and competing agendas. But guess who does not have any conflicts of interest? The individual.
Yeah.
The individual just wants what's best for them. They want to do as best as they can. They want their money to perform as best as it can, preferably with the least amount of fees. And so now all we have to do is answer to that person and build this company to delight that person. We don't have to think about financial institutions and what they need. We don't have to think about heads of HR that are worried about, this reflecting poorly on them. And that has been such a liberating, empowering decision for the company.
Oh, I can only imagine. I listen to Tony Robbins quite a bit, and he hits a lot on hidden fees. So Are you familiar with his book, Unshakable?
Oh, yeah. He's been a very big bullhorn and advocate for transparency and the fiduciary. So he's been definitely good for what we're doing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you guys are disrupting a massive market. It's absolutely huge. And I think what you're doing, like I said, is just incredible. You're helping the average person, the average citizen, hardworking, busting their ass every day. But even like you said, if you have some more money, you're not going to turn them away. Am I right?
Oh, no, we've definitely not. We've got clients that have got 401ks that Bloom's managing with north of $1 million. I think we've got several clients with multiple millions of dollars in their 401k that Bloom's managing for them. And the thing I want to make sure everybody knows too is that, and this is the other big reason why I think Blooom has been so disruptive. Nobody moves their money. Nobody's moving their money to be a client of Blooom. You can't move your money, actually. It's got to stay. While you're still at your employer, it's got to stay in your 401k. So we manage the money where it's at. You don't have to move your money anywhere to enable Blooom to be able to manage it for you. I think that's a big, betterment and wealth front and personal capital. If you want to be a client of theirs, you got to pick up your money and move it to them. That is not how we built our software. If it doesn't matter if your account's at Schwab, at Fidelity, at Vanguard, at John Hancock, it does not matter. We manage it where it lies.
It's amazing. So you really make it as easy as possible for the consumer, right?
We make it literally, it's a 4 or 5 minute process if you go all the way through to the end to sign up. And the hardest question we ask is, when do you want to smash your alarm clock? We don't ask a bunch of BS risk tolerance questions that a lot of people struggle to answer. We speak to you as a human being. I think we've built one of the easiest, simplest financial help tools that's ever been done, and that was not done by accident. Every single decision we've made on how to build this thing has come with, how do we make this even simpler? And you've heard the saying before, probably one of the hardest things to do is make something simple. That is especially the case in financial services. Because of regulations and disclosures and things of that nature. But I think we've done a decent job of making it really, really simple.
That's awesome, Chris. Just a couple final questions. Because this is the Idea to Reality podcast, what would you recommend to someone who has a really great idea but doesn't really know what to do next, what next step to take? What advice would you give to those people?
First and foremost, it may be a great idea in your head, but you really don't have a good idea. You may not have a good idea if it's a good idea for the rest of the population. And so this is, I'm definitely not the first one to say this at all, but I would strongly encourage people that have what they think is a good idea to figure out a way to field test it. Whether you build some rudimentary, and by rudimentary, I do mean rudimentary, does not need to be beautiful. Some type of a prototype, some type of a really basic beta version of something. Hell, even if it's an old-fashioned survey or quiz, like get out of your office or your house or your basement or garage, get out of there and talk to people that could be your target market, and make sure that you are validating your idea, because almost never is the idea you have in your head what is ultimately going to be something that actually ends up getting in front of people that makes a difference. So the earlier you can find out, with some of those types of tests, the better off you're going to be. Now, having said that, the mistake that a lot of people are going to make is it's much easier and more fun just to sit behind a computer and iterate and keep making your product more and more beautiful. You've got this idea, you start to build it, you make it prettier and prettier and prettier and prettier, and all along you have not gotten any feedback from people that might be consumers or buyers of your product. And so please get outside and get this in front of people. We did this ourselves, Kevin and I, because just organically in the roles we were at, I told the story about how many, there's probably north of 50 times somebody asked me to look at their 401k. So I saw, the need for this. We had, we were working in the industry, so we had plenty of opportunities to kind of field test this idea. And then even then, we started to build Blooom, and we started to get out in front of people, and we were testing it. And does this make sense? And what do you think about this? And the market will tell you things that you're not thinking about. Mm-hmm. You get so deep in the weeds, you get like buried, and you're like, you can't even hardly pull your head above water to like even stop and think about it from a different angle. So you have to have people coming in and taking a look at it from time to time, because they're going to find things that you didn't think about.
Oh yeah, that was absolutely amazing advice. Gary Vaynerchuk says all the time, get out there and the market will tell you whether your product is great or it's shit,
That's right. Exactly.
It's really as simple as that. So I think by doing what you just said and getting out there sooner rather than later,
yep,
you can help save yourself hours, days, years even of time trying to perfect something that the market might not accept. Maybe they would accept it a different way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you were saying, a lot of times when you're in the weeds like that, something that looks perfect to you, someone could give you something that's so basic that they see right away, like some advice that you wouldn't even see, because you have this perfect kind of idea of how it's going to be and how it's supposed to be and how people will react to it. But in reality, it could be far different from what you're thinking.
Well, that even happened. Remember I told you earlier, 90+% of the Blooom product early on was done by Randy and Kevin. Mm-hmm. And then so those two were like, those two guys were in the weeds, but then occasionally I'd pop my nosy head, into where they were working, and I'd look at something. I'm like, guys, what if we just did it this way? And there's a number of times where they were like, oh, yeah, because again, it's hard for them to see. They get so vested in the process, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That just having a fresh perspective from time to time can be really helpful. I think it was I like to listen to Reid Hoffman's podcast, Masters of Scale, and I think it was either he said this or one of his guests said this. And this definitely applies to software. It's not as much applicable to hardware, but software. I think he said that if you release your first version of your product, and again, I'm talking about software, and you're not a little bit embarrassed of what it looks like, then you waited too long to release it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's very wise advice. And the tendency for most people, a lot of people, when they get really close to an idea, is they start to develop a perfectionist like attitude, like they've got to make this just right. I'm not going to show this to somebody right now.
I've heard that so many times.
There's all these things I still need to do to it. It's not ready yet. And again, I'm quoting not me, somebody way more smarter and more successful than I am, saying if you're not a little bit embarrassed when you release it, then you waited too long to get it out the door for feedback.
Yeah, it's that. I can't remember how. There's like a saying that people say when it comes to perfection. Like I can't remember, but like trapped in the idea of trying to release a perfect product. It sounds much smoother than that, obviously, but I'm blanking out right now. Yeah, really, really great advice. So a couple of final questions to wrap things up. If you could go back 25 years and talk to your younger self, what advice would you give?
So that would mean if I'm going with that means I'm 20. So I'm 45 right now. So I'm 20. So I'm in college right now. Number one, I would say have more confidence when it comes to dating. I was a pretty unconfident guy in college, although I did marry a wonderful woman, and we've been married 21 years now, so it all worked out just fine. But I would say, have more confidence when it comes to dating back then at that time. Let's see don't buy that new car when you graduate from college. I have, I'm way wealthier now, obviously, than when I graduated from college, and I don't buy new cars right now.
Yeah.
But I did for some dumbass reason when I was 22 years old and didn't have two nickels to rub together and a bunch of student loan and credit card debt. I thought I needed to go buy a new car. Or lease a new car or something. So that was a really dumb decision. And it added to the pain and suffering that I had that I talked about at the top of the show with respect to debt. So don't buy the new car. Try and mitigate the amount of debt that you have would be some of the things I would advise myself on.
Very wise advice, if I may say so myself. Okay, very last question. What is a must for you every day? Like, what do you have to do every day, whether it's reading, meditating, exercising, something that if you don't do it every day, you don't feel right?
That's a great question. Well, let me I'll try and answer that question. I'll tell you a funny story, though, before that. I remember I also like to listen to Tim Ferriss and his podcasts, and he's got people on there. He asks a similar question. He kind of digs into people's routines, and trying to kind of uncrack the code on what makes people successful and what routines do they have. And you hear some pretty cool stuff about what people do. Then I remember reading this thing on LinkedIn, and it was a female founder of a startup, and she had written this blog, and it was like, my morning routine was, I got woken up because my 3-year-old was sleeping in bed with me and they crapped on themselves. and I had gotten no sleep that night, and I had slammed 3 cups of coffee in the morning, and it was just like so true. It's like, that's reality. It's like sometimes these people that give these impressions that they've got these rigid routines in the morning, maybe more power to them if they do. But generally what happens, I've got 2 daughters, and, so the mornings are, getting them out to school. Life happens, man. Life does happen. I wish I was more of a morning person. I have started over the last probably 6 months getting up a little bit earlier, and I try and buy some time in the morning before the girls get up to have a cup of coffee. I started doing the Headspace app and just having a little bit of time to myself, which I have found to be helpful, but it doesn't necessarily happen every single morning. Some mornings I'm tired and I don't do it. Right. Sometimes I got to get up earlier with the girls because they got to do something. So there's really, I don't know that there's anything that I have every single day, which is odd because I am a creature. I do like routine. I'm a creature of routine, but I don't necessarily have anything per se that I have to do every day. I do feel a lot better. I'll tell you one thing that I do when I do it, I feel a lot better, and that is when I take my lab for a walk. Even if it's just 20 minutes, I feel really good. Both me getting out and breathing the air and moving the body around, and for her benefit as well too, because I just see that she just absolutely loves it. It's like every time I take her for a walk, it's like the first time in her life she's ever gone for a walk.
Yeah, amazing, and they're really so incredible dogs. I love them.
Yeah. So when she's happy, it makes me happy. So I try and do that as much as possible.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing so much with everyone. And I'm going to link everything in the show notes, but where can people sign up for your services? Where can they follow you on social media, or where can people kind of follow you along your path?
Yeah, well, I would encourage everyone to, even if they don't necessarily think they're going to sign up, like I was talking about earlier, go to the Blooom website. Just remember, Blooom spelled with 3 O's.
3 O's, yeah.
Yeah, and take the 3 or 4 minutes and a bare minimum, get the free assessment on your 401k. See if you're kind of roughly on track. Give an idea what kind of fees you're getting, that are coming out of your account. And then I would suggest following Blooom Inc. on Twitter. Blooom with 3 O's, INC, is our Twitter handle. We is a good place to follow us there. I'm Chris K. COS, Chris K. Koss, is my Twitter handle, although Blooom is way more active than I am on that. But yeah, I think if people have also a little bit of time, when you go to the Blooom website, right on the front page, there's about a 3-minute video that we did that tells the story of the Blooom startup. It's really, really well done. It's a little bit of humor. It talks about some of the same things we talked about on your show today. But we've had a lot of really, really, really good feedback. And actually, it's weird. We checked the numbers, and like the people that watch that video, the likelihood of them signing up is like exponentially higher, because you see like the meeting behind the company. You see how this all started. You see why we did this. You see what the founders look like. You see what our team looks like. So if people have a little bit of time, it's an entertaining 3-minute video.
Oh, yeah. No, I'll link all that in the show notes, but that's the first thing I saw actually when I hopped on your site. Loved. Cool. I meant to tell you, it was really very well done.
Cool. Thank you. Well, and also Monday actually we launched nationwide TV commercials for Blooom. So there's a decent shot by the time your show goes up that maybe somebody's seen one of our commercials too.
Wow, that would be really cool. Are you personally in the commercial, or?
No, we actually hired legitimate talent this time. Not.
I think you guys did great. Just letting you know.
Well, thank you. No, this time we got real actors and actresses. So a little higher quality.
Okay, well, that's Blooom with 3 O's, everyone. Bloom. So I'll have this all linked in the show notes below. But once again, Chris, I just want to thank you for coming on the show and spreading so much incredible knowledge. And I want to thank you for the meaningful work that you guys are doing at Blooom. And you're really changing people's lives. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate you guys.
Well, thank you very much. If there's a way that like I could make a living just doing shows like yours where I get to talk about myself and my company, please let me know. That's one of the funnest things I get to do, is get to talk about. I mean, I think most people like to talk about themselves and like to talk about things they're passionate about. So thank you for giving me the forum and the floor and the opportunity to do this.
It's my absolute pleasure, Chris. And once again, just thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you so much for listening to this value-packed episode with Chris Costello from Blooom. I really appreciate you taking the time to tune in. If you enjoyed the show or found any value in the message, I would very much appreciate it if you could subscribe and leave a review on iTunes and tell at least one friend. This helps us get more exposure to the podcast so we can help more and more people take their ideas and bring them into reality. Stop by on Instagram where I'm at talntamir, or on Facebook where I'm at facebook.com/talntamir, and leave your feedback for me anywhere you see fit. Send me a direct message, tag me anywhere in your story or in a post, and we can continue building relationships and helping each other out. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.